Is academia family friendly? Let's find out. Welcome back to That's Academic. My name is Stephen Thomson, and we're here for the third episode on this channel. And we're going to be asking the question and hopefully answering the question, is academia family friendly? And to help me address this question, I'm delighted that I'm joined today by my very first guest on this channel. That is Dr. Stuart Hargreaves. He's an associate professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And a full disclosure, Dr. Hargreaves and I used to work together. So I'm delighted to have him on the show. I'm delighted that he's going to be discussing this really important topic with me. And again, if you find this interview, this episode, this channel useful, please spread the word, please like and subscribe. I hope you find it useful, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Hargreaves to the channel. Stuart, it's wonderful to have you with us for this very first week.
Thanks very much for inviting me to speak. It's nice to see you again.
Obviously, the highlight of your career, all the things you've achieved in teaching and research, and now you're finally on this episode, right? So
I'll be emailing my parents as soon as I finish to let them know.
So thanks so much for joining us. Now, what we're going to be discussing this week is whether we think academia is family friendly. And Stuart, what I would like to do is maybe to start off by looking at some of the more positive aspects of that. Aspects of academic life. You've worked for a number of years, as have I, as a full-time academic. Your experiences in terms of ways in which maybe you found it supported family life, or people you've worked with, other friends who are academics, ways in which it can support, you meeting family commitments. Then we'll come on to maybe the downsides, and I think there are some of those, and then maybe we'll see if we can form a consensus. So, from your perspective, what do you think are some of the main benefits of academia from a kind of family perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the first thing that I would sort of preface this answer with is to say, necessarily I'm going to be talking about, my experience in the institution that I've worked at. And I think that's really important because, of course, there's lots of different kinds of academics, and different institutions are going to treat people in different ways. People at different career stages are going to have different experiences. Men and women are going to have different experiences in how they're treated. So I just want to preface that by saying I'm really talking about my own experience. Certainly the nature of my experience in academia in terms of flexibility has been largely positive, right? In the sense that it's not what I call a real job, in the sense that it's not that I have to be in an office from, 8 in the morning till 6 at night or anything like that. So, I have fixed teaching hours, of course, and that schedule is not up to me. I teach when I'm asked to teach. But outside of the teaching hours, then of course my time is really my own for my own research and prep and all those, the administrative side of the job, all those things that that we have to do in addition to teaching. So because that is essentially my time, then yes, that means it's flexible. So that, for instance, my wife has one of those, what I said was a real job. She has to be in an office. She works long hours. She's a lawyer. So it's really nice that I'm not like that. I have the advantage of being able to be home every day or almost every day for, my daughter's bath time, for dinner time and those things. And then I can do, more work at home after that. So certainly to that extent, I feel very fortunate that I have that freedom to kind of arrange my daily schedule as I see fit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you made there about different institutions treating people differently. I think that's a really good point. And also, men and women might not be treated in the same way either. So obviously there's also a kind of country dimension here, or a jurisdiction dimension too, in terms of how that can support or not support family commitments. And what you say about, being able to be home for your daughter's bath time, I think that's, some people look at academia and they say, well, it's not as well paid compared to, being in private practice or being in industry. And that may be true, but how many people working in those areas, in those fields, don't get to participate in their daughter's bath time at night, or they can only do it once a week or whatever, because they're in the office late, or they're still going to check emails, whatever it might be. These are things surely which are much more important than the pay packet. Obviously the pay packet's important, but I mean, do you get the sense that because of that element, what that does for your life and your ability to support your personal life, is that for you a kind of almost like a trump card for academia? It's like, well, even although there are downsides, that makes it all worth it.
I wouldn't say it's a trump card. I mean, I think it's clear that nobody goes into academia, for the money. That's particularly true in our field, right? We're both in law, and so obviously, if money was the driving factor in our lives, we could earn a lot more money in the private sector, as you say. But again, the reality is that there's lots of academics out there that are in pretty precarious positions financially, professionally. So I don't think it's fair to say that it's always a trump card for all academics, right? It's, again, speaking for me, yes, it's something that is important to me, and I'm well compensated by my institution, and so it feels nice, and I get tremendous value from spending time with my daughter in that way. It's something that I really enjoy. But I well recognize that not every academic is going to be in that same position. But certainly, again, for me, it's important and something that I enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that, and obviously the flexibility has a few dimensions. One of the things that I found, again, this might vary from institution to institution. Some institutions might require you to be there all the time, treating it almost like a nine to five. I mean, I personally have never liked working like that anyway. I found I'm less productive if I work like that, and I've kind of learned that I'm most productive when if I work when I feel productive, rather than trying to force, especially research. If I'm not in the right frame of mind, I'm better doing something else, some routine admin work, for example, than coming back to the research when I feel fresh. So some institutions might try to get you to be there from 9 to 5, but for those institutions that don't, and the two institutions I've been in the last 8 years haven't required that, fortunately. Apart from like your teaching commitments, which obviously is a minority of your time in terms of actual contact hours, usually, to a greater or lesser extent at least, plus meetings, which these days are obviously remote, but normally would be held face-to-face. Apart from that, you can work from anywhere, right? So, you can be back at an earlier time at home, whatever, it could be for a partner, it could be for kids, but also you could just choose to work from home all day if you had no face-to-face commitments. Now that, of course, obviously, we've been forced to work from home during the pandemic, and that is difficult for people with families and so on. But, haven't you found that's another element of flexibility which kind of supports family life, supports family commitments, maybe especially in the summer, right?
Yeah, certainly the freedom to work from home, can be valuable. Personally, I don't actually work from home that often because I find I am more productive when I'm out. This was something that I sort of realized about myself when I was doing my PhD, so 10 years ago or thereabouts. When I had no commitments other than my own. At the time I wasn't married, I had no kids. I could just sit at home and focus on my research if that's what I wanted to do. But I found that if I didn't get out of the house, I just wasn't productive in the same way. And I just sort of, for my mental health as well, I needed to go outside. I needed to take a walk. I needed to meet people and talk to people. So even now, I could work at home more than I do. I try and go to the office most days, just because those little moments of meeting colleagues, even when it's relatively rare, because frankly, most of my colleagues now, particularly in the current environment, do work at home. But those little moments when I see colleagues and stop for a coffee, have a chat, I enjoy that. It's just part of my routine, and walking to work, walking 40 minutes each way, listening to a podcast or something, that kind of stuff is just good for my mental health. But at the same time, yes, having the choice to do that, I think is what is reward, or what is most beneficial, right? That I can stay at home if I want to work at home, if my daughter is sick, or if I'm not feeling on top of the world, or the weather's bad, or whatever the reason is, right? The fact that I can choose to do those things, I think that's what is most important. It's a huge benefit to have that choice.
Yeah, I would again agree with all of that. And one thing that I think we might come to when we look at negatives is job security, because that's maybe part of the answer for many people as well. But if you have a tenured position in a city you like, at a university you like, actually that can be very supportive of family life and family commitments, right? Because it means that you've got a secure job pretty much for life. The salary can actually be okay as well. Do you think that's also a valid point?
Yeah. I mean, tenure is obviously important, and something that people want to have. And of course, tenure, the form that tenure takes is a bit different in different parts of the world. I don't know that after I had tenure, I don't think I suddenly felt that I had more freedom in terms of my family life. I think I always, and this is just a personal thing, I always wanted to prioritize my family over my work. And I did that before tenure. And I realized a lot of people don't. But when I was pre-tenure, I had a young child, and I thought, well, if I never see her now, it's not like I'm going to get those years back. She'll only be 2 years old. She'll only be 3 years old, for this limited amount of time. So I don't know that having tenure changed my own perspective on family life, but certainly, I can see how it would free up some people, that they'd feel freer to not be in the office as much, or to not kind of hit those expectations every year in the same way that they necessarily did, or they might have done before tenure.
Yeah, I mean, those are good points. I mean, I think the way I was really wanting to couch that was to say, if it kind of gives you an anchor for your family, right? So, you've got that job security, you've got the financial security of what's basically a permanent job by that stage. And so that kind of allows your family to have a base in a city without, I mean, let's face it, most universities, I think in most countries are publicly funded. Obviously, different countries have different systems, but a publicly funded institution is not likely to go bankrupt or to shut down in the way that a company might, for example. So I think I was meaning just more in terms of that kind of degree of permanence once you actually get the tenure. As you say, there are also issues about whether tenure frees you up or not. That might be something I come to look at in another episode, on tenure itself. But just in terms of giving that solid anchor where one member of the family's got this job which has got a lot of flexibility, and it's basically a job for life if you're tenured.
Yeah, no, I mean, job security is obviously important. It's very good. Again, my institution is a bit different. It's not a job for life. There is mandatory retirement in Hong Kong, sometimes 60, sometimes 65, depending on where you are. So very much not a job for life. But nonetheless, a stable long-term job. And yeah, absolutely, that makes it easier to make certain kinds of plans about, as you said, building a life in a particular place. Absolutely.
Now, I feel that we're kind of getting towards the negative territory. It's kind of hanging there, just waiting to be, it's the fruit that's been waiting to be plucked from the tree here. I think we do both acknowledge as people with families, we both acknowledge that there are a lot of advantages, especially in the flexibility of academic life that support family life and family commitments. But there are downsides, right? I mean, for you, what are a couple of the main downsides of academic life as far as is compatibility with family life or family commitments is concerned?
Yeah, it's a good question. So while the day-to-day of the academic life, I think, is very flexible for the reasons that that we talked about just now, the bigger picture of how you move between jobs or move between places, I think, can actually be quite challenging, particularly if you have a family, right? So as I said, I have a partner who works, who has a career that's valuable to her, just as important as mine. So it's not as though I can quit a job at a university and get a job at the university down the street, the next week. As you well know, that's not how the academic cycle works. You have to plan in, perhaps year-long cycles of applications and interviewing and all these things. And then you have to think, well, where could I go that would also work for my partner? That a place that she could get a job that is meaningful to her, or that, her career continues in the same way. And I think so. Perhaps paradoxically, university life, academic life, can actually be inflexible in that way, because there are a relatively small number of, for our field, right? There's a relatively small number of law faculties in the world where we are capable of teaching, right? If we're common law trained lawyers, okay, so then you're in a subset of law to begin with. We want to teach in English, so that's another subset. A city that you would be happy to live in, again, where your partner could equally find a job, that's another small set. At a university that wants you, that has money to hire you, and equally you want to go there as well. So those are increasingly sort of small numbers, whereas in other kinds of jobs, so let's say we were practicing lawyers, for instance, then you might find that that's actually a lot easier to find a different kind of job in a different city at a law firm where you have a broader set of skills, a more practical set of skills that will be of use in different kinds of organizations. So it's not really a criticism of academia per se, but just a reality that once you're in an institution, once you develop a particular reputation, or you have your particular narrow scope of research, then being able to take that somewhere else is actually not always as easy as you might think. So in the big picture, what I'm trying to say is, that aspect of academic life is quite inflexible, but nonetheless, the day-to-day, how I organize my day, what I decide to research, what I decide to focus on, of course, that part is very flexible. So it's a bit of a paradox, I suppose, in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you brought up this issue about moving city or maybe even moving country, which is something we've both done, right? In fact, we both actually joined the same institution at the same time. And I don't know about you, but I remember when I first went out to Hong Kong from the UK, I was terrified. I didn't really know what I was doing. It was very exciting, but it was absolutely terrifying. And I still can't quite believe I did that and made a success of it. But, I'm not sure I want to repeat that experience now too often. I'm not old, but I'm older, as we all are. And indeed, when you have a family, if you've got a partner, if you've got kids, obviously this moving around becomes not just more difficult, but just much more stressful as well. I mean, you have to think about, does your partner have a career? And are they able or willing to just up sticks and move just because you need to go somewhere else, whether it's for a permanent contract or a promotion, or just because for some reason, your current place isn't working out? What about kids if they're in school, for example, just dragging them away from their friends? I mean, like you say, I feel like, there's a limited number of universities around which are decent universities, at least. I mean, if you're lucky enough to start in one of the kind of better universities. Take Hong Kong, for example, which is where we've both been working these last number of years. You've got 3 law schools, basically. So that's only really 3 employers that you can choose from. Whereas if you're working as, I don't know, an accountant in private practice, right, you can work in hundreds, if not thousands of firms. The same would go for a lot of professions. Now, I know that that's not going to be the case for, again, all fields, but even someone like a doctor, you could work in a number of public hospitals, but then there are surely hundreds of private clinics you can work in. I feel like if you're working as an academic, you are quite constrained in how many institutions you can go to before you have to start looking at moving to another city or moving to another country, which is also very expensive, right? And then you've got all kinds of long-term planning difficulties, like, well, do I buy somewhere to live? If you can afford to do that, and the answer to that will vary depending on where you're going, or am I renting? How long am I going to be there for before I might have to move again? For me, this upheaval aspect is probably, I think it's it's not the number one actually, but it would probably be in my top 5 major downsides of being an academic. I think it's a real problem, but I'm not sure there's a solution to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I want to put it in perspective. I'm very fortunate to be where I am, and so this is a slight downside, but I don't want to exaggerate it and say it's kind of the end of the world. I mean, certainly, you can think of, and we mentioned this before the interview started, that thinking about academics in much more precarious positions, adjunct faculty, PhD students, people trying to cobble together jobs, who really do have to sort of move, just trying to keep up, to pay the rent and so on. That's a different kind of problem in academia than this problem that I'm talking about, which is I'm in an institution and I'm tenured and I'm well paid and that's fine. And it's like, oh, well, maybe it's not as easy to move somewhere else that I would like. It's a problem, but it's a different kind of problem than faces other academics. And I think it's important to keep that in in perspective. But yes, I agree that it can feel, and we've spoken about this as well, that it can feel quite stifling if you suddenly get this sense that actually, well, maybe I'm here longer than I intended to be in an institution. You want to move somewhere else, but it's hard to envision where that would be, whether it's for professional reasons, whether it's for family reasons. At the moment we're dealing with COVID, so that's a whole other set of reasons where, as you well know, institutions may not be hiring as much as they were in the past. Budgets may be cut, or institutions may be anticipating budgets being cut. I'm sure that's going to be the case in a lot of institutions around the world. And as you and I spoke, again, I keep referring to things prior to the interview, but the neoliberal agenda of cutting higher education is always there, right? That it can be a prime target for budgets when they need to be cut. And I think that's only going to make it harder for people to move between institutions at the higher end, at kind of the mid to senior end, and it may limit the number of initial positions that exist at the junior end as well. So yeah, that's just kind of the reality of the situation. But as you said, I don't know that there's a particular solution to that. That is just kind of the nature of the job. And I think that's one of the things that people trade, right? In effect, that you trade this long-term stability in a job that, the vast majority of people will not get in any other kind of job. And we're very, very fortunate to have that kind of long-term stability, those of us that are tenured. And in exchange, you get a bit less money than you would in the private sector, at least in the case of law, or a lot less money in the case of law. But also you maybe don't have this flexibility to up sticks as quickly as you might in other places. So that's hard, but I don't know what to do about that. And the truth is, I don't know that I ever thought about that, when I was thinking about becoming an academic. It's not something that really kind of occurred to me at an earlier stage in my career.
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised the point actually about like adjunct staff, contract staff, and also untenured staff, bearing in mind that the tenure system works differently. I mean, in the UK, for example, there isn't really a tenure system, whereas in the US, of course, it's a big thing. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the other day I was reading something, and I forget the exact numbers, but basically, at least in the US, and I suspect this is playing out in other countries too, the proportion of teaching staff who are tenured, full-time tenured staff, is reducing every year. So more and more people are being hired on a contract basis or an adjunct basis, and of course one can speculate on the reasons for that. But what I really worry about is, for people who are maybe they've done their PhD, now they're looking at postdocs and they have to move around for that. Then they're maybe looking at some adjunct position or some 1 or 2 year fellowship. And all the while they're getting older, right? Again, they're not old, but the years are going past. Now, what really worries me is if that starts to interfere with other aspects, other more important aspects of life, like getting married, if that's something that someone wants to do, having kids, buying a house. Again, you might not be in a financial position to do that, but these, I'm like you, family comes first and everything else, including work, this being person takes a very, very distant second. In fact, it's probably after second, right? Even although it's meaningful for me, it's just, of course, not on the same level. And part of what this channel was actually here for is to try to tell people this stuff, or at least give people a bit of a heads up on some of these issues, because like you, I'd never thought of this stuff before. I don't want to blame it on people who were around me when I was doing my PhD and say, well, they didn't tell me. But I just find it interesting that people aren't really told this stuff, and there's this almost veneer. These things are not really spoken about, but actually it's a big, big problem, because you also have to then look further down the line and say, well, if these downsides exist, and I'm not for a minute forgetting the upsides, but if these downsides exist, how many people then are put off of academia as a career choice, or simply cannot fold it into their lives because of these things we've just been talking about, and therefore they do something else? What does that do for quality? Does that attract quality people into the industry? I'm not sure it does. So, I just think, personally speaking, it's something that's given me pause for thought about whether this is the right thing for me, or is it easier in some ways to have a 9 to 5, even if that involves being in the office, because provided you're working for the right employer and all the rest of it, you know that you can pretty much settle down somewhere and not have to be concerned about these issues. I mean, I don't know, the jury's still kind of out on that for me, but it has given me a bit of, a series of kind of existential thoughts as far as academia is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously structural issues within academia. I mean, I think a really obvious one that is how can I put this? There are far more people, obviously, that complete PhDs or that start PhDs than there are available full-time academic jobs. And every day I'm thankful that I have one of those full-time academic jobs, despite the flaws that and the challenges that it may pose. I'm still fundamentally very lucky to have it. But there's lots of people that go into debt, that pay all this money to do a PhD and then don't end up with the job that they want at the end, or they spend these years kind of almost being led on by institutions doing these postdoc after postdoc. And again, this is worse in some subfields than others, or adjunct position after adjunct position, or cobbling together multiple adjunct positions in the hopes that maybe they will also at the same time have enough time to write something that will then get them noticed in an institution and hired for a tenure track job. And it's this kind of treadmill effect. And I know people that have been through it, and it's brutal, right? It's extremely hard. How you solve that, I don't know. I mean, certainly having PhD programs, I publish the statistics of all the people that have gone through this PhD program. Where are they now? I think that would be meaningful, right? To really, ram it home that everybody who goes in to do a PhD is intelligent and wants to work hard. Like those are table stakes, right? So just because you're intelligent and work hard is not going to guarantee you that you will get the job that you want at the end. It's a big slice of luck. It's a big slice of unfairness sometimes, right? The way that interviews go, there's biases that work, against some people and for others. To get back to family, some people can't move because of family. I was very fortunate. I was able to convince so my wife is Canadian. She's from Toronto. I was very fortunate to be able to convince her after I finished my PhD to move to Hong Kong with me, because that was the only place that I had a job offer from, right? I needed a job because I had to pay off debt from student loans from when I was a law student. The loans weren't really from a PhD. My PhD was funded, of course, but I had loans from being a law student. And so I really just needed a job. I wasn't an expert in Hong Kong law, but I just needed a job, and this was the one that I got. And I was very lucky that she was able to come with me, was willing to come with me. But if we had children at that time, I don't know that it would have been possible. Or if I was in the position of having to take care of elderly parents or some other factor, right? There's all these other factors that, I was lucky and I was able to do these things, but I well recognize that not everybody, is going to have that slice of luck and the chance to do those things. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to do it. And I don't think it's an answer to say, oh, if you want a job as an academic, well, you should go to Hong Kong, or, if you're from the UK or Canada, go to Hong Kong or go wherever to get a job. That's not an answer. It worked out for us and that's fine. But it's not an answer to the systemic issues that really are a problem in academia, that, people put in all this time and effort, and too many people, I think, don't come out of it at the end with what they had hoped, no matter how hard they work. I mean, that's a real shame. But people smarter than I will have better solutions for that.
I'm not sure they necessarily will, actually, but you raise a whole series of great points there. Just two things that you mentioned really kind of stuck out. The debt point is a really good one, and it's just kind of food for thought. How many jobs out there require, you might be in a system where you have a 3 or even a 4-year bachelor degree. So I had a 4-year bachelor degree. You usually have to have a master's to go into a PhD. I mean, it's not always the case, but I think it's increasingly the case, or often the case. So there's the 5th year. And then the PhD is a minimum of 3 years, and I believe it's even longer in some places. So you're looking at maybe 8+ years there without income or without any meaningful income, financing that with, if you've got a scholarship, you're fortunate. Again, this will vary a lot depending on the country, but often debt is involved. And then you go in and sure, the pay might be a little bit less, but you're looking at a kind of combination of factors. The debt that's hanging over you, the pay certainly will not be great as a postdoc, for example, or a junior fellowship. And then you've got obviously the job security issues to look at. The other thing that you mentioned, which was a really good point, and maybe it's one of the kind of the last things we'll look at here, is this point about people who can't move. And that's a really good point. And as you rightly say, it's not necessarily just spouses, partners, kids, but also it can be caring for someone. And that's an elephant in the room. I probably should have thought of that myself, and I didn't. But that can tie someone to one place. Now, where I think that can impact someone's career in ways which are not immediately apparent. Because let's say that person is in a place where there are, the universities are not very prestigious or something. Academia is a very kind of prestige-driven field, for better or worse, and I'm not really sure it is for better, to be honest, because that results in a whole load of biases as well. And if you can't get a position at a more prestigious university or whatever because you can't move for whatever reason, that can have all kinds of implications for where you get published. Even with double-blind peer review, we all know that the institution you're at matters. It has implications for maybe, I don't know, consultancy or kind of external work too. And it has other implications too. There is a lot of this kind of prestige snobbery in academia, which I think is quite disappointing. Oh, he's only at this institution. Oh, look where she went. And it's like, well, you don't know why the person went there. And it could be something like the person needs to go there to look after someone who's not well, for example. So again, I think these are really human elements, which I just feel like the system kind of overlooks. And there are a lot of people in the system, and I'm not going to shy away from controversy in this channel in future episodes and stuff. I think there are people in the system who just pretend like this is not an issue, and it's all about how hard you work, and it's all about merit. I'm not saying there's no meritocracy in it. There is, but there is a big portion of luck as well, as you say. And I really worry about the ways in which people's careers can be negatively impacted by some of these structural factors. As you say, I'm not sure really what the answer is, or if there is an answer as such, but I think it is something people should seriously take into account when they decide whether to go down the path of becoming an academic, right?
Yeah, and this also, I think, connects to, you talked about hierarchy, and I think that's a good point, that academia is very hierarchical from an early stage. Where you go to get your undergraduate degree can influence where you get your master's, and where you go to a PhD, and where you do your PhD can and does influence where you get your first job, and from so on and so forth, right? It's kind of a chain really that starts at a very early age, or an early level. And I think one thing that, in addition to the problems that you identified with that, another one that is, I think, at least in my experience, too often ignored, is that that really disadvantages people that don't come from a family background where they're exposed to academic jobs, right? So first generation students, or the first in their family to go to university, are not going to have the same understanding of that kind of chain of positions that somebody so for me, for example, I'm very lucky that my father was an academic. And so I grew up at least having an understanding of what the life of an academic was. And it also meant that I always had somebody that was a soundboard that I could ask questions if I had any about this kind of stuff. But lots of people, the vast majority of people, aren't going to come to academia with that background, with that advantage. But I don't know that universities have been successful in remedying that. That I don't know that we provide PhD students with kind of these basic explanations of where you go matters, who you write with matters, where you publish matters. The kind of all these hidden rules. And even for me as somebody that came from an academic background, it wasn't a law academic background. So coming into legal academia, there were all these hidden rules that I didn't know about and that I'm still learning, right? Publishing, tricks of publishing, publishing in US law journals, how to do that. I had no idea about any of that. And I still don't know a huge amount about it, right? It's a different thing. But then there's other people that know lots and lots about it. It can tell you all kinds of things about how to game the US law journal system. So that's just a small example, right? Again, and I'm somebody that had the advantage of coming from an academic background and still found myself at a loss for a lot of these things. So again, universities, they can replicate these structures of power because the people that hire incoming academics often hire people that look like them or that have backgrounds like them, that know the game and can talk about it in the same way that that the hiring committee talks about it. And so that's going to be hugely disadvantageous to people from different kinds of backgrounds, to people who are not from the same country, right? If you're applying for a job from England and you're from somewhere else, you're going to be at a disadvantage. If you're from a different ethnic background, you're going to be at a disadvantage. These are all things that universities, I think, replicate, despite often also talking about the importance of diversity and so on in their brochures to students. I don't know that they really address that in terms of their hiring practices. So again, when people are thinking about getting into academia, I think finding a mentor that can explain some of this stuff would be tremendously useful. And again, particularly for people that come from different kinds of backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, a whole range of fascinating insights. And there's so much there still to unpack, I feel. And there's so much material there to be spoken about in other episodes. Maybe we'll have you on at some other point in the future. There's a lot in there. It's funny you mentioned hidden rules, because that is also, to me, kind of how it feels. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm some kind of crusader here or something, but that, again, is part of the idea of the channel, is just to try to say to people, look, whether it's me, but it's not just me, this channel, it's people like you as well, and other people I'm going to be interviewing. Here are our experiences, and here are things that you should think about. And I feel like, in PhD programs, often there'll be, here's a methodology course or something, and I think, well, actually, it'd be more useful if you just use that time to go through things like, here's how the journal system works. Here are some things to think about when you're, applying for postdocs, or here's how tenure works, blah, 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 blah. And I think, if we can shed any light on that stuff through this channel, if that helps someone out there when they're deciding whether to do a PhD, or if they're already in the PhD, how they manage these things, I think, that would be, I would be delighted if the channel, contributed to that in any way. I mean, just to kind of wrap this up, do you feel, I think we spent longer on the downsides than the upsides there, but if you try and integrate the two, do you overall have a sense that academia is family friendly, having discussed these things? Or, where would you kind of sit, I don't know, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, where 0 is like, this is completely not family friendly, and 10 is, it's absolutely family friendly. Where do you think you would put academia on that scale?
Yeah, if there's no doubt in my mind that if we are comparing academic jobs to jobs in general, then it's incredibly family friendly, right? For the vast majority, I think of, again, with the caveat that I'm talking about tenured academics, who are relatively well compensated at their institutions, it's incredibly family friendly. The fact that I can come and go as I please, right? Within reason, as I said, obviously I have my teaching obligations, but otherwise I can come and go as I please. That's hugely flexible. A tiny fraction of people in the world have that privilege in their jobs to be able to do that. So yes, for all I say about, look, these are some aspects that could be improved, or these are challenges, when you compare it to other jobs overall, there's no doubt it's an incredibly flexible job.
Yeah, I think my answer to that would also depend on the individual's situation. If it was a kind of 0 to 10, for someone who is maybe adjunct or, contract staff or something, I'm not sure what number I would choose, but I would put it very low. It could be a 2 or 3 or something. But I think if you do get a tenure position that pays all right at a place you like, then I think it shoots up massively. It becomes, maybe an 8 or a 9 or something. I agree that the flexibility is so rare, and you can mold so much around your family commitments as well. But I really think I agree. It does really depend on what stage you're at, and again, whether you've got the permanent contract and everything also. So that's been wonderful. One question that I'm going to put to all interviewees, and you've got the disadvantage here of being the first ever to answer this, right? So you're a trendsetter in terms of what you say here. But all of my interviewees, all my guests, I'm going to ask them a question and see what they'll have to say. And the question is, if you could change one thing about academia, what would that thing be? And it can only be one thing, mind, okay? What would your answer to that be?
Right. I think the increasing emphasis at universities on international rankings is deeply unhelpful to the institutions themselves, to the students, to the staff. To move up and down the rankings, at least the way the rankings are currently constituted, or most of them, requires a lot of metrics. And so because there's a demand for metrics, it creates metrics that I don't necessarily really think reflect what actually a university should be doing. And you can see this in a few different ways. So you can take it on the research side, where there's an increasing emphasis on obtaining external grants, which does make sense in some fields, but makes less sense in other fields. But the need for the ranking just means everybody has to be pushed up to apply for external grants. I know in the UK, that's a real issue. It has impacts on teaching. The boiling down of teaching to anonymous student scores. That can lead to kind of a customer service mentality among some people if they're worried about their scores. It can work unfairness on women and ethnic minority groups, right? There's lots of research out there that says people that look like you and I and sound like you and I instantly do well or do better than we might otherwise would in a CTE, or as they call them here, a student evaluation score. But all of that is driven by a need for metrics. And it doesn't actually prove that, it doesn't serve to increase quality in the classroom. I don't think it serves to increase quality in research. It just creates incentives for academics to ask for money for things. But all of that, I think, comes down to the rankings issue. The governments that fund the universities want some proof that they're spending their money wisely. And the proof that they say is, well, we look at the rankings of the university compared to where it was 5 years ago, as though there could be any logical sense that a university is ranked 16th versus 23rd on the global scale, as though that could mean anything, right? It's ridiculous on its face to say that you've moved up and down 5 places in like a league table on a global scale of universities, but they take it very seriously, right? So it's not that government shouldn't have value for their money. Of course, a publicly funded institution should be providing good value. It should be performing good research, world-class research. It should be providing a top quality education. These are all good things, but achieving those things through the constant imposition of metrics, I find unhelpful.
A bit of diplomacy at the end there. No expletives on this channel. Yeah, I mean, actually, the metrics thing is something that drives me a bit wild as well, I have to say. And if you, it's something I actually was planning to explore in other episodes and stuff, because there is again so much to unpack there. And if you drill down into some of these metrics, like if you go onto the methodology and I'm not going to name any metrics, right? I'm not going to get myself into trouble at this early stage, but if you look at the methodology and they say, well, 10% of the global ranking is made up of this. And this can be something completely spurious, like employer reputation or something. Well, that gets back into the old prestige issue. It just, the whole kind of legacy issue, and again, all kinds of structural issues and inequality issues and all the rest of it. Internationalization, or the percentage of international students. Well, I know that in Hong Kong, for example, mainland students have often counted, mainland Chinese students have, to my understanding, have counted as international students, where they're clearly not. They're from the same country, albeit from a different jurisdiction within it. So again, you can game the system here, you can game the metrics. It was something I read a few weeks ago, and it's a Dutch university, I forget which one, it might have been Utrecht, but I'm not 100% sure. And apparently they're abandoning, I think it was impact factors that they're abandoning, and instead they want to assess people on their staff on to what extent the research is kind of promoting open access. Now, I think that's a much more noble aim, right? Because there's so much about open access that's positive. And certainly in our field, some of the most prestigious journals are not open access. So then you're between a rock and a hard place, because you're saying, well, it's not a mutually exclusive choice, but you do sometimes find yourself saying, well, do I try and publish here in this journal, which is very prestigious in my field, but very few people will ever see the research because it's not open access? Or do I publish somewhere which is less prestigious, but it is open access? Now, if you can find a journal that ticks both boxes, that's wonderful. But, again, there's a lot in there. So, yeah, the metrics thing, I think, is... I think rankings can be quite fatuous, to be honest. And, you always hear people saying, every institution has got something to say about their ranking. Oh, we're first for this or fifth for this, but the actual thing that they're first or fifth for gets more and more kind of niche and kind of abstract. And it just becomes virtually meaningless. You can't have everyone being first for something, right? And I totally agree with you, but I've got so much to say about that also in other episodes, and maybe we'll talk again about it. But I think that's an absolutely great first answer, Stuart. Thanks so much for that.
All right.
Look, thank you so much for joining us, and your insights have been really fantastic, and you've really exceeded what I was even kind of hoping for to get out of these kind of exchanges. So thanks so much for your time. Stuart Hargreaves there from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where he's an associate professor, and that's going to lead us wonderfully into future interviews with other guests. Thanks so much, Stuart, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
So that concludes my very first interview and my very first guest's appearance on That's Academic. That was Dr. Stuart Hargreaves, Associate Professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And you can find a link to Dr. Hargreaves' profile in the description below this video. Thank you so much for joining us again on That's Academic. If you find this channel useful, if you find it insightful, or you know someone else who would find it insightful, please spread the word. Please like the videos and subscribe to the channel. And if you click the notification button, you'll be informed whenever a new episode is uploaded. Thanks very much for joining us, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.